My name is Caroline Whitfield. I am 34 years old. And on the night of March the 8th, I was alone in a hospital bed in St. Raphael's Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio, running a fever of 104.2 degrees while my parents were somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, sipping champagne on a non-stop flight to the south of France because my sister had asked them to come. I had asked them too. I had asked them 3 times. My mother had said, "Caroline, you're going to be fine. It's just a kidney thing." That was the last thing she said before she turned off her phone. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone else. I just lay there in the pale fluorescent light of room 217 with a plastic identification bracelet on my wrist and an IV line in my arm, and I listened to the monitors beep and I counted the ceiling tiles. There were 47 of them. I counted them twice. And somewhere in that counting, in that silence, I made a decision that I never once spoke out loud. What they didn't know was that exactly 26 months later, they would be in a hospital room of their own, and the only thing standing between my father and a slow, irreversible decline was a kidney. And I was the only one who matched. This is that story. I want to go back to the beginning. Because if you only know what happened in that hospital room, you might think it was one bad moment, a lapse in judgment, a family making a hard call under pressure. But that would be wrong. What happened in March was not a lapse. It was the latest entry in a long, documented pattern that had been going on for as long as I can remember. And to understand why I did what I did, and why I have absolutely no regret about it, you have to understand the world I grew up in. My father is Gerald Whitfield. He is 63 years old. He spent 31 years as a regional sales director for a commercial insurance company based in Columbus, and he retired early at 61 with a pension and a habit of telling anyone who would listen that he had built everything the family had from nothing. He is a man who believes that decisiveness is a virtue, that sentimentality is a weakness, and that the most important thing a person can demonstrate is composure under pressure. He has a firm handshake, a good laugh, and absolutely no idea what to do with a daughter who does not need his approval. My mother is Patricia Whitfield, née Harmon. She is 60 years old. She taught elementary school for 18 years before deciding she preferred volunteering. She sits on the board of 2 local charities and considers herself a woman of the community. She makes extraordinary pie. She has spent the better part of 4 decades managing the emotional weather of a household whose entire atmosphere was organized around one gravitational center, my younger sister Brooke. Brooke Whitfield is now 31 years old. She is, by any external measure, the kind of woman people notice immediately. She is tall. She photographs beautifully. She has the specific social gift of making whoever she is talking to feel like the most interesting person in the room for approximately 10 minutes. She works in what she calls marketing consulting, which in practice means she posts sponsored content on social media and occasionally runs campaigns for small brands who pay her in product and hope. She has never held a salary position for longer than 11 months. She has a 2-bedroom apartment in Chicago that my parents pay half the rent on. She takes 2 international trips per year. She has, at various points, described herself as an entrepreneur, a creative director, and a lifestyle curator. She has never once described herself as someone who needed help, because she has never needed to. Help was always already there. I want to give you 3 specific examples, not because I need you to validate my choices, but because the pattern matters. The pattern is the story. The first example is Christmas of 2017. I had just been accepted to the paralegal certification program at Columbus State. I had saved the enrollment fee myself, $720, working weekends at a law office where I handled filing and scheduling for $43 an hour. I told my parents over dinner. My mother smiled and said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart." My father nodded once and then said, "Brooke, tell them about the agency." Brooke had just started following up with a boutique social media agency in Chicago. The rest of the dinner was about Brooke's possible future in marketing. My enrollment was not mentioned again that evening. When I brought it up 1 week later, My mother said she thought I had already paid for it and that they were a little stretched at the moment because they were helping Brooke with her first month's deposit. The deposit on Brooke's Chicago apartment was $3,200. I repaid my own enrollment fee in installments. The second example is August of 2019. Our family planned a beach trip to the Outer Banks. I had requested time off work 4 months in advance. 2 days before we were supposed to leave, Brooke called my parents to say she had a brand deal opportunity in Miami that same week and asked if they wanted to come visit her instead. My parents called me that evening and told me the trip was being rescheduled. The rescheduled trip never happened. I found out through Facebook that my parents had spent 4 days in Miami with Brooke, staying at a hotel on Collins Avenue. The photos were lovely. The third example is February of 2021. I had been dating a man named Thomas Ellery for 14 months. He was kind, he was steady, he worked as a structural engineer, and he was, for the first time in a long time, someone I could see a real future with. My parents invited the two of us to dinner at their house in Bexley. Brooke arrived uninvited halfway through the meal, fresh off a flight from New York, and proceeded to spend the rest of the evening telling stories from a content creator retreat she had just attended in the Catskills. Thomas tried twice to redirect the conversation and was met with polite but absolute incomprehension. My mother served Brooke her food first. My father refilled Brooke's wine glass 4 times and mine once. Thomas and I drove home mostly in silence. He never came to dinner again. I tell you these things not to build a case for sympathy. I tell them because they are facts. Documented, observable, repeatable facts. They form a pattern, and the pattern tells you who the people are. Now let me tell you what happened in March. I had been having symptoms for several months before the hospitalization. Fatigue, swelling in my ankles and legs, blood pressure spikes that I chalked up to stress, a persistent ache in my lower back that I assumed was from sitting too long at my desk. I was working full-time by then as a paralegal at a firm called Hendricks and Graves in downtown Columbus, handling case documentation for a senior attorney named Douglas Merritt, who was meticulous and demanding and had somehow, over 3 years of working together, come to trust me implicitly. I was also quietly building something else on the side, something I will tell you about in a moment. And between the two, I was not sleeping enough, not eating well, and not paying attention to the signals my body was sending. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday. Glomerulonephritis, an inflammation of the kidney's filtering units that, in my case, had progressed further than anyone expected given my age. My doctor, a nephrologist named Dr. Yvonne Castillo, sat across from me in her office on the 4th floor of the Wexner Medical Complex and explained the situation with a calm thoroughness I found deeply comforting. She told me my kidney function was at 41%. She told me we were not yet in crisis territory, but that we needed to monitor closely, that I would likely need a biopsy, and that there was a real possibility that within the next several years, depending on how the disease progressed, we would be having a conversation about dialysis or transplant. I absorbed this information the same way I absorbed most difficult things, quietly, without flinching in front of anyone who didn't need to see it. I called my parents that evening. My father answered. I told him the diagnosis, the kidney function numbers, the need for a biopsy. There was a pause. He said, "Well, what does the doctor say to do?" I told him. He said he was glad I had good insurance. He said to let them know if I needed anything. He asked me to give his best to Dr. Castillo. My mother called back 20 minutes later. She asked if I was scared. I said I was managing. She said she thought I was very strong. She did not offer to come. I did not ask her to. 3 weeks later, the biopsy confirmed the diagnosis. My kidney function had dropped 2 more points in the intervening weeks. Dr. Castillo put me on a medication protocol and told me she wanted to see me monthly. I scheduled all my appointments myself, drove myself to every one of them, and said nothing further to my parents beyond brief text message updates that they acknowledged with hearts and brief responses. Then in March, on a Wednesday evening at 8:47, my temperature spiked. I drove myself to St. Bideau, Raphael's because I could still drive, which in retrospect I probably should not have done, and by the time they had me in a room, my fever was at 104. There was a secondary infection. My kidneys were under additional stress. Dr. Castillo's colleague, a Dr. Fenwick, told me I needed to stay at minimum 3 days for observation and IV antibiotics. I called my parents from the hospital bed at 9:22 that night. My mother answered. I told her where I was, what was happening. She said, "Oh, Caroline." And then she said, "We're actually leaving tomorrow morning. Brooke needs us." I asked what was happening with Brooke. My mother said, "She's been having a hard time, sweetheart. She's going through something. And she found this incredible villa in Provence. She got a good rate on it and she wants us all to come. She bought our tickets already." I said, "Mom, I'm in the hospital." She said, "I know, but you have good doctors. And Brooke really needs this." I asked to speak to my father. He got on the phone. I told him my fever, my kidney function, the infection. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Caroline, you've always been the one who handles things. You'll handle this." And then he said, "We'll check in when we land." They turned their phones off at 10:15 that night. I know because I called twice more and got voicemail both times. I stopped calling after that. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone to tell them what had happened. I didn't post anything. I didn't text my sister. I just lay there in the blue-gray silence of room 217 and I let it settle. Not the anger. I had moved past anger a long time ago. What settled was clarity. The particular crystalline clarity that comes when something you suspected for your entire life is confirmed beyond any possible doubt. I reached for the small notebook I always kept in my bag. I opened it to a fresh page, and at the top, in my usual handwriting, I wrote one sentence: "Build the wall." That was the moment I stopped being the daughter who waited to be seen and started becoming the woman who had already decided what came next. I want to tell you about what I had been building. 18 months before the hospitalization, I had started a legal document preparation service from the second bedroom of my rented apartment in Clintonville. I called it Clarity Docs. The concept was simple. I knew from 3 years of paralegal work that enormous numbers of people, particularly women, going through divorces, name changes, custody arrangements, small estate matters, needed correctly prepared legal documents but could not afford a full-service attorney for every step of a relatively straightforward process. I was not an attorney. I was meticulous. I was fast. And I understood exactly what courts wanted to see. I charged flat fees for document preparation. I turned work around in 48 hours. I worked evenings and weekends, and I reinvested every dollar back into the business for the first year. By the time I was lying in that hospital bed, Clarity Docs had 23 active clients and a waiting list of 11 more. It had brought in $11,040 in revenue over the prior 6 months. It was not yet enough to replace my paralegal salary, but it was real. It existed, and no one in my family knew about it. Not because I had deliberately hidden it, but because no one had ever asked me what I was working on. I was discharged from St. Raphael's on the morning of Saturday, March the 11th. I went home, slept for 14 hours, and then I opened my laptop. I registered Clarity Docs as a formal LLC in the state of Ohio on March the 14th. The registration fee was $99. I paid it from the business account I had opened the prior October. Over the next 4 weeks, I restructured my client intake process, built a simple website I had designed myself using a template platform, and began running targeted advertisements in 3 online community groups where I knew my target clients were active. I set a monthly ad budget of $200. In April, Clarity Docs took in $4,680 in a single month. That was the first month that had broken $4,000. My parents returned from Provence on March the 21st. My father texted, "Home safe, how are you feeling?" I responded, "Better. Thank you for asking." My mother sent a photograph of lavender fields. I liked it. I did not go to their house for Easter that year. I told them I was behind on work and needed the weekend. What I actually did was spend Saturday building out a client referral partnership with a local divorce attorney named Margaret Cho, who had been watching Clarity Docs' reviews accumulate on a local business listing platform and reached out to ask if I would be interested in receiving client referrals for document preparation on an ongoing basis. We met at her office on a Saturday morning, April the 8th, at 10 a.m., and we signed a referral agreement before noon. By June, I was averaging $6,200 per month in revenue. I had hired a part-time virtual assistant, a woman named Reina Torres, who worked remotely from Phoenix for 18 hours per week at $22 an hour. I had also, quietly, consulted with a financial advisor named Kevin Shea about how to structure the business for long-term stability, and I had opened a separate investment account funded entirely by Clarity Docs income. I was putting $1,200 into it every month. My kidney function remained at 38 to 40% during this period. Dr. Castillo and I met every 4 weeks. She was cautiously optimistic about the medication protocol. She told me that with careful management, we might be able to avoid a significant escalation for several more years. I followed every instruction. I reduced my sodium intake. I stopped drinking alcohol entirely. I slept 8 hours a night. I managed my stress with the same discipline I applied to everything else, by focusing only on what I could control and releasing what I could not. My parents and I spoke once or twice a month. The conversations were cordial and brief. They told me about Brooke's latest project. She had launched a new content vertical about slow travel and was planning a trip to Portugal in the fall. My father had taken up golf. My mother was repainting the guest room. I listened. I offered the appropriate responses, and I said nothing about Clarity Docs. At the firm, Douglas Merritt had begun bringing me into preliminary client meetings, which was unusual for a paralegal at my level. He told me once, on a late Thursday afternoon in August, that I had the sharpest instincts for case preparation of anyone he had worked with at that level. I thanked him and went back to work. I had been quietly tracking my own performance metrics for 2 years. I knew exactly what I was worth. In September, I gave notice at Hendricks and Graves. I gave them 8 weeks instead of 2. Douglas Merritt was surprised. Then he was gracious. Then he asked if I would consider a consulting arrangement on specific cases going forward. I said I was open to it. We are still consulting today. I want to pause here for a moment and speak directly to whoever is watching this right now. If you are someone who has spent years being the invisible one, the capable one, the one who handles it, the one who is quietly building something while everyone else is being celebrated, drop a comment below. Tell me one word. Just one word that describes how you felt the moment you realized no one was watching. Because I want to know how many of you are out there. And I want you to know that someone is watching now. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. By the spring of the following year, 14 months after I had lain alone in that hospital room, Clarity Docs was generating an average of $9,400 per month in revenue. I had expanded the service to include 2 additional practice areas, brought on a second part-time assistant, and signed a workspace agreement for a small dedicated office in a shared professional suite near the short north. The office had 2 windows, a glass door with the Clarity Docs logo on it in frosted vinyl letters, and a rent of $850 per month that I paid without blinking. I also moved. I left my Clintonville rental apartment in February and purchased a condominium in the Italian Village neighborhood, 1,080 square feet, top floor, 2 bedrooms, exposed brick, refinished hardwood floors, and a private terrace that looked west over the rooftops. The purchase price was $274,000. I made a down payment of $55,000, drawn entirely from the investment account I had been building for the prior 18 months. My mortgage payment was $1,160 per month. My parents did not know I had moved until I mentioned it, almost in passing, during a phone call in late March. My mother said, "Oh, you got a new apartment?" I said, "Actually, I bought a place." There was a brief silence. My father said, "Well, that's something." That was the end of that conversation. I did not invite them to see it. They did not ask. In April of the second year, I received a call from Dr. Castillo's office. My quarterly labs had come back and she wanted to go over them in person. I drove to the Wexner complex on a Tuesday afternoon and sat across from her in the same chair I had sat in 2 years earlier. She told me my kidney function had dropped to 31%. The progression had not been dramatic, but it was steady. We were now in a range where the conversation about longer-term planning needed to be more explicit. She used the phrase transplant evaluation timeline. She said it was not urgent, but that it was real. I asked her what the process looked like. She explained it thoroughly. Testing, compatibility screening, the national registry, living donor evaluation if I had anyone in my life who might be a match. I thanked her, drove home, made dinner, and then sat at my terrace table with a glass of water and thought about what she had said for a long time. I thought about the registry. I thought about wait times, which can be 5 to 7 years. I thought about the people in my family, their blood types, the basic genetics of donor matching. I thought about my father, who is 63 and has never, to my knowledge, had a significant health crisis in his life. I thought about my mother, who has type 2 diabetes that is managed but present. I thought about a lot of things, and then I went to bed. 12 months after that conversation, my father was the one who got sick. He had been having symptoms for months that he attributed to the stress of a retirement that had not turned out to be as relaxing as he imagined. Fatigue, discomfort, a blood pressure reading at a routine physical that sent his doctor immediately to the phone. The diagnosis, delivered in October, was focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, an autoimmune kidney disease, with a current function level of 28% and a trajectory that his nephrologist described as aggressive. He would need dialysis within the year if a matching kidney was not found. He was placed on the National Transplant Registry immediately. My mother called me that evening. I could hear in her voice something I had not heard before. She sounded small. She said, "Caroline, Dad is very sick." I said, "Tell me what happened." She told me. I listened without interrupting. When she was finished, I said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I know that's frightening." She said, "The doctor said the best chance is a living donor, someone who matches." She paused. "They said family members are the most likely to be compatible." I said, "I understand." She said, "Caroline, you have the same kidney condition?" I said, "I know." She said, "Do you think, would you be willing to be tested, just to see if you match?" I said, "Let me think about it." She said, "Of course, take all the time you need." I thanked her. I hung up. I sat at my terrace table for 1 hour and 40 minutes. I watched the sun go down over the rooftops of Italian Village. The sky turned the particular pale orange it turns in October in Ohio when the air is cool and the light is low, and everything has the look of something about to change. I picked up my phone. I called Dr. Castillo. I asked her to schedule the compatibility screening. The results came back on a Thursday morning at 11:53. I was at the Clarity Doc's office, reviewing a client file, when the portal notification came through. I opened it and read it twice, very carefully. I was a match. A strong match. The tissue typing, blood type, cross-matching, all of it aligned in the way that happens, statistically, in a small percentage of sibling or parent-child pairs. I was not the only person in the family who had been screened. My mother had been screened and ruled out due to her diabetes. Brooke had been screened in Chicago. Brooke was not a match. I set my phone face down on the desk. I returned to the client file I had been reviewing. I finished my notes. I sent my assistant 2 follow-up tasks for the afternoon, and then I picked up the phone and called the transplant coordinator at St. Tean, Raphael's, the same hospital where I had lain alone with a fever of 104.2 while my parents flew to France, and I scheduled a consultation for the following Thursday. The consultation was thorough. My own kidney function was now at 34%. It had stabilized somewhat under the medication protocol, and Dr. L. Castillo and the transplant team both confirmed that while donation carries its own long-term considerations for a patient in my situation, It was not categorically impossible. It would require careful evaluation. It would require informed decision-making. It would require me to be sure. I spent 3 weeks being sure. I met with 2 independent nephrologists for second opinions. I met with a transplant ethics counselor at the medical center who was there specifically to ensure that I was making this decision freely and without coercion. I met with Kevin Shea, my financial advisor, to ensure that my business and financial situation were structured to support any outcome. I spoke with Reina Torres, my assistant, about business continuity planning. I did not speak with my parents during this period beyond brief updates. Still in the evaluation process. Will update you when I have something to share. My mother called twice to ask if I had decided. I said I was still in the process. She said she understood. Her voice said she was terrified. That was fine. She was allowed to be terrified. My father called once. He called on a Tuesday evening, and I almost didn't answer. But I did. He said, "Caroline." I said, "Hi, Dad." He said, "I know I don't always." And then he stopped. He started again. He said, "Your mother and I have been talking about the night you were in the hospital, about Provence." A pause. "We should have stayed." I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I know." That was the end of that call. It was not enough. I want to be clear about that. An apology over the phone is not an accounting. It is a beginning, at best. But I noted it and I moved on. 2 weeks after that call, I called my parents and asked them to come to Columbus. I told them I wanted to meet in person to discuss the next steps. My mother said, of course, they would come any time. I told them the date, a Saturday in late November, and gave them an address. The address was not their house in Bexley. It was not my condo. It was the conference room at the offices of Hendricks and Graves, where Douglas Merritt had graciously allowed me to schedule a meeting. He knew why I needed it. He did not ask questions. When I tell you what happened in that conference room, I want you to understand that I had planned it with the same precision I applied to everything else. I had arranged for 3 people to be present in addition to my parents and myself. The first was Dr. Yvonne Castillo, who had agreed to be there in a personal capacity to answer medical questions. The second was Kevin Shea, my financial advisor at my request. The third was Douglas Merritt himself, who sat quietly in the corner and said almost nothing because his presence was not about words. It was about witness. My parents arrived at 11:30 in the morning. I had told them 11:30. They were on time. My father came in wearing a jacket and tie, which surprised me. He must have understood that this was not a casual meeting. My mother carried her purse against her chest the way she does when she is nervous. They both stopped when they saw Dr. Castillo and then Kevin Shea, and then Douglas in the corner. My mother said, "Caroline, what is this?" I said, "Please sit down." They sat. I remained standing at the head of the table. I had a folder in front of me, but I did not open it for some time. I said, I wanted to have this conversation in a place where we would all remember it clearly, and where there would be people present who could confirm later what was said. My father looked at Douglas. Douglas looked back at him, neutral and steady. I said, I have completed the medical evaluation. The transplant team has cleared me as a potential donor, pending final decision. I am a strong match for Dad. I want to tell you what I have decided, and I want to explain why. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father went very still. I opened the folder. I took out a single sheet of paper. I'd written 5 things on it in the same handwriting I use for everything, and I read them aloud in sequence without rushing. I said, on March the 8th, 2 years and 8 months ago, I was admitted to St. Raphael's Medical Center with a kidney infection and a fever of 104.2 degrees. I called you both that evening. You left for France the following morning. I paused. I lay in room 217 for 3 nights, alone, without a single family member present. My mother made a sound. I continued. Over the past 26 months, I built a legal document preparation business called Clarity Docs from the 2nd bedroom of my rental apartment. It is now a registered LLC generating an average monthly revenue of $9,400. I purchased a condominium in February. I did this without a single dollar of family support and without asking for any. I looked at my father. He was looking at his hands. I am telling you this not to compare myself to Brooke, and not to ask you to rank your daughters. I am telling you because I need you to understand who is sitting across from you. I need you to understand that I have been building my life in silence for a very long time, and that the silence was not because I had nothing to say. My mother was crying without sound. My father was motionless. I said, I have decided to proceed with the donation. The room was very quiet. I said not because I have forgotten what happened, not because we are suddenly fine, but because I know who I am. I know what I can live with. And I cannot live with the alternative. I set the paper down. Kevin Shea was looking at his notepad. Dr. Bellis Castillo was looking at me with an expression I could not entirely read, something between admiration and grief. Douglas Merritt was still. My father looked up from his hands, and for the first time in my memory, he looked like a man who did not know what to say next. He said, Caroline. I said, I know, Dad. My mother stood up and she came around the table and she held me. She held me the way she had not held me since I was small. And I let her. I held her back. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vindicated. I felt the particular ache of something that was true and could not be changed, and the simultaneous weight of something that was over. The surgery was scheduled for the second week of January. Both procedures went well. My father's recovery was difficult but steady. My own recovery took 10 weeks before I was fully back to my normal capacity. Raina managed the business beautifully in my absence. Our revenue did not dip. It actually grew. She signed 2 new clients while I was recovering because she had the judgment to recognize good ones when they appeared. My father was home by February. He calls me on Sundays now. Briefly, because he is not a man who has learned entirely new patterns overnight, and I do not expect him to be. But he calls. And he asks real questions. And he listens to the answers. My mother came to Columbus in March and cooked dinner in my condo. She stood in my kitchen and looked at the city through the terrace doors and she said, You really did build something. I said, Yes. She said, I didn't know. I said, I know you didn't. There was no anger in it anymore, just the plain fact of a thing. Brooke called once, about 2 months after the surgery. She said she was proud of me. She said she didn't know how I had done it. I said, You have to start before anyone is watching. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said she needed to go. She had a call. I said goodbye, and I meant it. I want to say something to whoever is watching this right now and recognizing themselves in any part of it. The hardest thing is not the moment they let you down. The hardest thing is the moment after, when you have to decide who you are going to become in response. Because that decision is entirely yours. No one else can make it. No one else can take it from you. You do not have to be angry to build something powerful. You do not have to announce your plans. You do not have to wait for someone to see you before you begin. The seeing will come. It always comes. But by the time it does, you will have already arrived at a place where the seeing is no longer the point. I am 34 years old. I have a kidney condition that I manage with discipline and care. I have a business I built in the dark. I have a condominium with a terrace that faces west. I have a father who calls on Sundays. I have a mother who stood in my kitchen and finally said the things she should have said years ago. I do not have a perfect family. I do not have a story that ended neatly with everyone transformed. What I have is this. I know exactly what I am worth. And I stopped waiting for anyone else to tell me. The loudest comebacks are built in silence. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer in the comments below, because I read them and I want to hear from you. What was the moment, the specific moment, when you stopped waiting for your family to see you and you started building for yourself? Tell me. I am listening. Thank you for being here. thank you for watching this to the end. If you've made it this far, it means something in this story landed somewhere real for you. And that means the world to me and to everyone at Revenge Chronicles. We pour everything into every story we tell, and knowing that someone out there is listening, is being seen through these words, is why we keep going. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Every story we release is crafted with the same care and intention, and we never want you to miss one. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment. Leave a word. Leave whatever you feel. We will be back tomorrow with another story from another woman who chose silence over surrender and let her life do the talking. We are grateful for every single one of you.